Thereby, they were able to create a line between the top of the building in the east and the lorry in the west. And then, with the help of this pulley and this harness, one by one, the man, his wife and child made their way across the wall.
Alternatively, people hoping to swim to the west might be deterred by this exhibit, part of the underwater fence in rivers and lakes around West Berlin. Several people have suffered nasty injuries on the spikes. But that didn't deter one enterprising man swimming with his own make of submarine motorbike. This is a model, not the original. For afterwards, the machine was patented and put into commercial production. Another refugee had joined the capitalist West.
Ralph Mulder was an East German border guard until he escaped in 1984. He's now a student and works part-time in the Escapees Museum. Ralph, can you tell me, first of all, when you were working as a border guard in the East, what your orders were as far as escapees were concerned?
If there's a refugee and he's arriving the last fence, so you have to order to shoot if they don't want to stop at the last fence.
And is that shooting to wound them or shooting to kill them?
At first, you have to warn him that he stop. But if it is impossible to stop him, then you have to shoot to die.
How did you yourself escape from the East?
I was a second lieutenant on the East German border to Bavaria, and I escaped from a watching tower. I was stationed in the night on this watching tower. I tied the second man up and I blocked the tower, ran to the last fence. There were only 30 meters and I climbed the last fence up and jumped over.
And did you realize that if one of your colleagues had seen you, they would have shot you?
No, I know where are the guards in this district and I have 20 minutes time to come over.
Why did you decide to leave the East?
I think the first reason depends on political things, and I'm unhappy in the East. I'm unhappy with the military system in the East. They said the GDR, East Germany, is a state who is against militarism. But in the last years, there's more militarism in schools and in the army, more than in the last years.
That was Ralph Mulder talking about his escape across the wall. Each escape is different, but none is easy. The barrier here, for example, includes the slow-down chicane, albeit charmingly disguised with flowers and shrubs. The wall itself, 13 feet high, and if you do get to that fence, there's a tripwire and an electric alarm system. So why should men and women risk running that gauntlet? Some say it's for political freedom, some say it's for freedom of speech. Some will even admit it's simply the search for a better and higher standard of living. But it's worth remembering that the people living in those blocks of flats in East Berlin enjoy a substantially higher standard of living than people living in many other parts of the Eastern Bloc. Michael Crick has been looking at life behind the wall.
The famous nightlife of Berlin, east, not west. It's a favourite spot for visiting British soldiers with Western currency. For about £10, they can get all the food and drink that a soldier needs. But they must be back over the wall by midnight. But as in any country, the bright lights of the capital's discos and restaurants are hardly typical of everyday life. On the eastern side of the wall, average real incomes are about half that of West Berlin, although meaningful comparisons are extremely difficult. On paper, East German living standards are actually not much lower than Britain's, but consumers suffer constant shortages.
You can get once on one day everything, on other days you can get no tomatoes, on the other days there will be other things you cannot buy, and for higher grade consumer goods you have to wait several years, maybe for cars, for motor cars, 10 years or even longer.
Foods regarded as luxuries are expensive for those without Western currency, nearly £5 for this tin of mushrooms. The East Germans claim that after the war they were worse off industrially compared with the West. The Russians exacted heavy war reparations from East Germany, whereas West Germany was supported by American aid. Even so, it's the most advanced country of the Eastern Bloc, with a growth rate of 4.8% last year, the highest in Comecon. East Germany benefits from favourable trade terms offered by West Germany. It's often joked that East Germany is effectively a member of the EC. Like the EC, agriculture is subsidised and often inefficient. Unlike the EC, there is officially no unemployment.
There is no open unemployment, but there is a closed unemployment. That means that there are people in the factories who are not necessary for working.
What we might call overmanning.
Yes, that's correct.
But nobody is actually without a job, though.
No, nobody is without a job.
The German Democratic Republic boasts a strong health service, particularly in maternity care and preventative medicine. Housing is heavily subsidised with low rents, though accommodation is often cramped. Every night, East Berliners watch West German television and are naturally influenced by its output. Not only is East Berlin physically closer to the West than nearly any other East European city, but economically and culturally too.
Here in West Berlin, despite its relative economic prosperity, there's a new and potentially expensive problem. It's the new refugees. Not for them the daring dash across the wall, nor the glamorous crossing point of Checkpoint Charlie. They arrive on the underground, every day, sometimes hundreds of them. Well, Michael's been looking at what drives them here and who's behind it.
These new refugees aren't Germans who've come over the wall. They claim to be the victims of politics and religion in countries such as Iran, Lebanon, India, Sri Lanka and Ghana. Many still frightened to show their faces. 50,000 are expected here this year, crossing from East Berlin, attracted by two accidents of history. First, West Germany's unusual willingness among European states to grant political asylum, a provision in the West German constitution in memory of those who wanted to flee from the Nazis.
Many who tried to flee have been rejected from other countries, and the Germans, after the war, they said, we want to be a country of refuge for those people being persecuted.
Having first flown into East Berlin, it's a simple train ride for the modern refugees to the western side of the wall. At the first underground station in the west, there are no border controls. For the Allied authorities to set up checks might upset Berlin's delicate political situation.
You are the first time in Germany?
At the political asylum centre recently, applications have swelled so much the authorities can't keep up. It's alleged the arrivals are encouraged by cheap tickets on East European airlines and that East Germany is trying to embarrass the West. With the German election in January, right-wing politicians want to crack down on these immigrants, arguing most of them aren't political.
Where do you come from?
Iran.
Why have you come to Berlin?
Because I have too many problems in my country for the soldiering and for the religion.
You cannot live in India. Well, why not?
Because the people disturb us. They are chasing us and they are beating us.
I was a soldier in Iran. I was a soldier. And I should killing Iraqi soldier. I don't like. For what?
Across West Berlin, public buildings such as this school gymnasium have been taken over to provide temporary accommodation and food. After a few weeks, still awaiting a decision on whether they can stay in the country, the refugees are moved to West German states.
In some states, for example, they are allowed to live in private houses. In other states, they have to stay in camps. In general, they are not allowed to work for the first 2 years. There are several other restrictions which make their life rather difficult.
The Koshasali family arrived from Damascus a few days ago. They're Kurds and say they were persecuted by the Syrian government. So they sold their shop and left. It'll be months before the Koshasalis know whether they can live permanently in West Germany. In fact, many of the political refugees are eventually refused political asylum and deported home again.
For an assessment of Berlin's future, I spoke to Klaus Böhling, government spokesman under Helmut Schmidt from 74 to 81, when he took up diplomatic duties in the East. The rather special platform we met at overlooks the Brandenburg Gate, the most imposing point along the wall, behind which runs to the east Unter den Linden, pre-war Berlin's political thoroughfare. He's an author and lecturer with intimate knowledge from the highest level of East-West German politics. Klaus, it was 23 years ago that John Kennedy stood on this very platform where we're standing and made his famous pledge of being a Berliner.
I'm a Berliner, yes.
I'm a Berliner, and pledging the support and continuing support of the West for Berlin.
Yeah.
Is that still believed, or on the international stage has Berlin now become a forgotten cause?
I think most of my fellow Berliners are deeply convinced that your government, the American government and the French government will guarantee the freedom of West Berlin. On the other hand, many of us are very realistic about the readiness of the three Western powers to risk a conflict about Berlin. And I think it's in the German interest to avoid everything which could produce a conflict between the two German states. We shouldn't ask the Americans, the Britain and the French for things they are not willing to do. After the four-power agreement, we do have by and large stable situation in Berlin, and I think Mr. Gorbachev, who is certainly a highly intelligent realist, is interested in keeping a peaceful situation in Berlin, and the Bonn government, I guess, will contribute to a realistic and careful policy in Berlin.
From the politics of the wall to the art of the wall, and whatever the political significance of the structure is, it's certainly become an enduring canvas for artists from around the world, as Michael discovered.
It's the biggest canvas in the world, an ideal playground both for young graffitists and more accomplished artists. The other side of the wall, the east, is whitewashed, but for 25 years the western side has been a steadily growing mural of sentiment and image. The overwhelming message is clear, that the wall is at the frontier of liberty, and behind lies repression. Its symbolic power has attracted established painters from all over the world. Some even copyrighted their work. It's Berlin's gallery of political art.
Well, it all started, of course, with young people who just like to spray on city walls. And here they found sufficient place to do